Go.
Welcome back to an unusual edition of the Dershow. It's being brought to you while I'm driving in a car or being driven in a car. Obviously, I'm not driving. I had to be in Palm Beach today to present a case to the Palm Beach Town Council um, involving an important First Amendment issue, and I thought I'd finish early enough to get back to Miami Beach to do the show from my office. But it took me almost 3 hours. It took me close to an hour just to get out of Palm Beach. And as soon as I saw that I wouldn't get back on time, I decided, since there was such important news today about the deal, we'll talk about that in a minute, that I would try my best to have a show, even if it's not technologically perfect, in a car. I hope it works. I hope I don't lose you. And the miracles of modern technology. Let me get right to the point. This was a terrible, terrible, but necessary deal. It was a victory of the heart over the head. Um, Hamas extorted Israel. They killed the hostages, some of them, we don't know how many, and they would have killed the rest of them, or at least allowed them to die a slow, miserable death. And so they agreed to a deal. It's not a deal. It's not a deal. It's an extortion. It's like, an offer you can't refuse. A deal. Somebody puts a gun to your head and says, your money or your life. Jack Benny, I remember the guy, comedian who was very cheap, said, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. But a murderer, a robber puts a gun to your head and he's credible. It's not a deal that you give him the money. It's you're doing it to save your life. And Israel did this to save the lives of whatever remaining hostages there are. Almost certainly the 33 that will be released, which are mostly babies. Some of the babies have already been killed. There was already evidence that two young babies and a mother were murdered. But probably there are 33 who are alive, and 33 of them, or 32 of them, we're not sure the exact number, will be released. We don't know when. The deal will go in effect, though, the day before President Trump's inauguration. So he will be able to say he satisfied his threat. Um, Hamas agreed to a deal before he was inaugurated, and that's a good thing. I don't think the deal would have been accepted, but for Trump's threat, or Trump being what he is, somebody who threatens and carries through his threats. And so we're going to see an agreement, a deal finalized on January 19th, the day before the inauguration. Um, when will the hostages be freed? We don't know. How many of them will be freed? Uh, we don't know. How many of them are dead? Of the 250 that were originally captured, we don't know. We also don't know how many exactly prisoners Israel has to return. Numbers are as high as 3,000, including 1,000 that were captured after October 7th, and others who were convicted, literally convicted of uh, murder or mass murder, and were sentenced to life imprisonment. There are some people who have been administratively detained, to be sure, but we're not talking about innocent people here. We're talking about people who are absolutely guilty of involvement with terrorism. Some of them have been tried and convicted, some of them haven't been, but none of them are innocent. So, when people say, oh, hostages are being traded for hostages, no, nonsense. We're talking about babies on the one hand, very elderly people on the other hand, um, that are being given back to Israel, and Israel has to give up as many as 3,000 guilty terrorists, many of whom have been convicted. Remember, they gave back Sinwar in exchange, Sinwar and 900 others, or maybe more, in exchange for Gilad Shalit, one person. And look what happened. Sinwar became responsible for the killing, probably, of 2,000 Israelis, 1,200, on October 7th. 250 were kidnapped, and probably another several hundred were killed in the subsequent events. So, that was a big mistake. Um, when Benjamin Netanyahu was a young man and wrote books about terrorism, he wrote books about terrorism. I wrote books about terrorism. We both took the same position. In theory, you should never negotiate with terrorists because you can't negotiate with terrorists. Again, it's extortion. We'll blow up your plane if you don't, whatever. So um, there are many people, scholars and practical, pragmatic people, who take a different view, who say, no, no, if people are kidnapped, well, that's really too bad. It's terrible for the families, but we'll go in and try to rescue them, but we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to give up land, the Philadelphia corridor. We're not going to free horrible people. Sure, we'll send in good supplies, medical supplies, food supplies. That's already being sent in, but we'll send in more. That kind of negotiation um, would seem appropriate if you're going to negotiate at all with terrorists, which I think in the end I wouldn't do. But the problem is that Israel is a democracy, and it's a democracy with a soul. And so when the parents of hostages come to see Benjamin Netanyahu or other members of the cabinet and beg them and cry and plead, please do whatever you have to do to get my son back or my daughter back or my father back, how do you say no to that? Um, Maybe you should, but you can't. Not in a democracy. The vast majority of Israelis, or of any decent democracy, would say, do what you have to do to get the hostages back, even if it means some compromise with security, and even if it means mortgaging your future in some ways. And that's what it is. The hostages are immediate. We know their names. We know what they look like. We know what their parents look like. So, of course, you're going to be more sympathetic to them than you are to the person who's going to be killed as the result of it, who you don't know and who's abstract, and he's in the future. So, these are not deals. Um, I don't know the exact details. The New York Times printed what they claim are the details of the agreement, but there are many things that are uncertain. For example, the Philadelphia corridor, which is absolutely essential to Israel's security. There are accounts that say Israel agreed to pull back eventually. Some say no, they agreed to limit the number of people there. They agreed maybe in the future they'll pull back. Benjamin Netanyahu denied that pulling back from Philadelphia corridor was a condition of the deal. We don't know. We'll see. And so the big question remains, we know that this deal would never, ever have occurred but for Donald Trump. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I don't care what anybody says, and there are all kinds of articles today in the New York Times and other places saying, no, 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 it was all Biden, it was all the Democrats, it was all Biden. They had 4 years to do this. Well, they had a year and a half to do it since October 7th. And literally the day Donald Trump gets elected, the dynamic changes. And as soon as Donald Trump said that there will be hell to pay if they're not returned by the time of my inauguration, you can see that Hamas changed its negotiating postures. Now, Trump may also have put pressure on Netanyahu. Um, and of course, Netanyahu and Israel want to be in the good graces of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was interested in getting a deal before the inauguration. He got it. And that's very good that he was able to pull that off. The deal will not be completed during his time, but he managed to do what couldn't have been done and wouldn't have been done before. And so you got to give him credit. You also have to give Biden credit. I mean, his team, Blinken and others, laid the foundation for this. But final negotiations were done with Wyckoff, who was the Trump person. And it was interesting, very different than the hostage crisis that occurred in the transition between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. That was a one-off. The Iranians were holding a lot of American hostages, and the Iranians wanted to make nice to Reagan, and they didn't want to make nice to Carter, and so they released all the hostages on the day of the inauguration, after the inauguration, so that Reagan would get credit. This is different. This is the beginning of the deal. That will have occurred before the inauguration, but now it all falls on Donald Trump's lap. He's going to have to see that the deal is enforced on both sides. He's going to have to tell Israel what they can and can't do in the event the deal is broken. And if you know one thing about Hamas, it broke every single deal it ever made. Remember, there was a ceasefire in effect on October 6th, and they just ignored it. There was a ceasefire with Hezbollah on October 6th. They ignored it, and they sent rockets into Israel. So if you're Israel, you have to assume that the ceasefire will be broken, and you have to assume that they'll never get all the hostages back, that Hamas will always hold on to one or two, if they can, in order to keep leverage over Israel. Look, Hamas probably fears that Israel would break the ceasefire if they got all their hostages back. And it'd be a strong case for that, because the deal was not a deal. Again, it was a negotiated extortion. So there's no moral obligation to keep the deal. The only reason for keeping the deal is you want to make sure you can deal with them again next time. But I'm not even sure that's a major consideration. So we have to wait and see what is going to happen in the short term, in the middle term, and in the long term. And remember too that while we're applauding the fact that maybe 30 some odd hostages will return to their families, which is a great thing, we still have Iran moving at a quick pace toward acquiring deliverable nuclear weapons. And don't let anybody fool you into thinking they're not doing it. They're doing it surreptitiously. They're not allowing inspectors in. They will develop nuclear weapons. Maybe they won't cross the threshold because they know Israel's spy activities are pretty good. And if they were about to cross the threshold, Israel would probably, not certainly, but probably know about it and probably take military action. We'll see what Trump does. Remember, Biden refused to give Israel the bunker bombs. So did Trump, by the way, in his first term. The bunker bombs necessary to attack the underground nuclear facilities. Let's see if the Trump administration changes that policy now and gives Israel not only the bunker bombs, but the B-52s that are necessary to carry these very, very large bunker busting bombs. We'll have to follow that very carefully. But this is just the beginning. It's a bad deal for Israel, 32 for 3,000. But as I said, it's something that no democracy could resist. When you have a tyrannical, murderous regime like Hamas, who will put a gun to the head of any hostage on a whim. They killed the 6 people, including the American, just a few months ago. And they've killed babies, and they've raped women. We know all of that. And the question is, how do you deal with them? Do you just capitulate and surrender? Israel, I think, did as good as it could do. It kept the war up. It destroyed the Hamas leadership along with the Hezbollah leadership, and it negotiated the hostages. Now, nobody's happy. The hostage families think that Israel didn't do it quickly enough. It should have given more. It should have done it more quickly. It should have gotten more hostages back. People on the other side are saying, no, Israel should not have given back the 3,000 prisoners. They should have just tried to rescue the hostages. That's impossible. Even Hamas doesn't know where all the hostages are. Some of them have been sold to other groups. I mean, real slavery. They're using human beings as chattel. and some of them are probably dead. Some of them are probably very, very, very sick, and we'll begin to know a little bit when the 32 are returned. Maybe they have some more information about the others. Maybe not. Maybe they were all kept in isolation. We just don't know the answer to any of those questions. So, a good day for the families, a good day for the people who really care deeply, as we all should, about the hostages, a bad day for Israel's security, a bad day for the future of Israel, and a good day for Donald Trump, a good day for Joe Biden. They will both have this event recorded in their legacies in a positive way, but that doesn't mean that they deserve all the accolades. Certainly, neither alone, I think, could have done this at this time. Uh, Trump was necessary, but probably without the foundations being laid in advance, it wouldn't have happened as quickly. It probably would have happened, but it wouldn't have happened perhaps as quickly. We don't know the dynamics. But one thing we can be sure of, and that is without Trump's election and threat, this wouldn't have happened. Certainly not during the Biden presidency. Remember, too, the deal is not going to take place during the Biden presidency. I don't think we'll see, maybe we will, any Americans return. By the way, the American hostages are all going to be returned. Some are dead, some are alive, but they're part of the initial group of 32. Um, so Trump will be able to say, look, I made a threat. I said if the hostages weren't really, I didn't say all the hostages, that's maybe in the long term, but we got them. We got the Americans back. I did it. He's taking credit. He's taking a victory lap. I would say he deserves the credit, but I wouldn't be taking a victory lap as long as there are still other hostages and as long as so many of them have been killed. But, again, he's not responsible for that. That happened under someone else's watch. So this is a complicated day for Israel. But, anytime events like this occurred, look at what happened many, many years ago. In, I think it was 1976, when Israel went in to rescue the hostages in Entebbe. And they rescued most of them. But Yoni Netanyahu, who had been a Harvard student, Benjamin Netanyahu's brother, was killed. A woman who was in the hospital had been taken off the airplane, rushed to the hospital, put in the hospital, and Idi Amin was so upset at what Israel did, either he killed her in cold blood or ordered her to be killed in cold blood. So, these things are never cost-free. Almost nothing is when you're involved in complicated situations like this. Every war we've won at great cost, both to our own soldiers, but to also civilians. End of World War II, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Dresden, Berlin, Tokyo. Great cost. Many, thousands times more civilians were killed in those wars than in Gaza. You wouldn't believe it. Speaking of which, the head of one of the parties in Spain is trying to prevent the Israeli basketball team Maccabiah from playing in Madrid, claiming that we don't want people cheering for genocide. And then this is the head of a party, she said Israel is committing a genocide in Syria. In Syria, whatever, 12 people have been killed in Syria, and how 700,000 were killed by Assad. She never mentioned a word about that. When Assad was murdering people, that was real genocide. But this idiot, hard left, crazy political figure in Spain says that Israel is committing genocide in Syria. The word genocide has lost all meaning, which is too bad. It was coined by a Jew, a Holocaust survivor, and it means gena, which means genetic, killing a racial group, the whole racial group. Israel has killed what, less than 2% of the population of Gaza, and the population of Gaza has grown tremendously since Israel first occupied it in 1967. If Israel wanted to commit genocide, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to do, even before the hostages were taken. There would be no reason for not doing it, but they didn't. They never, ever deliberately kill a civilian. That's a categorical statement. No Israeli soldier, to my knowledge, in the war in Gaza has ever deliberately taken aim and killed a child or a civilian. No, people die in warfare. But it's all the fault of Hamas. They started it. They use human shields, and they're responsible for every single death. By the way, some of the people killed in Gaza were killed by friendly fire, that is, Hamas friendly fire, by Islamic Jihad rockets and Hamas rockets that misfired, but they don't get counted. You know what does get counted in the 45,000 alleged deaths in Gaza? People who died of cancer. That's Israel's fault, right? People who died of heart attacks. That's Israel's fault. People who died in childbirth. That's Israel's fault. No. It also counts, people who are, probably most of them, combatants or people who helped the combatants. So, the number of people killed, the number of actual, real, honest to goodness civilians is a fraction of the 45,000 and far fewer, in my view, than the number of actual combatants who were killed. But you tell that to that idiot from Spain who accuses Israel of genocide. Forget about the idiot from Spain. How about the idiots in robes at the ICC who claim that Israel committed genocide? How about the Pope? How about the Pope? Now, the Pope, should know something about genocide. Of course, because the Inquisition was genocide. The Crusades were genocide. But what Israel's doing is not genocide. Look, the Vatican has been fantastic over the years since the end of the Second World War. Not so good in the Second World War, but pretty good afterward. Most of the popes have been very strongly supportive of human rights and of Israel and of a fair assessment. This pope, not so much. He doesn't seem to. He takes sides politically, and that's something I think the leader of a great religion shouldn't do. All right, we'll wait and see. Trump has, he has a victory, but he also has a burden, and his burden is that he now has the responsibility for making sure that the ceasefire works, and we'll see if it does. All right, let's get some questions, and I hope you're still seeing me as we drive in the car. Here's one question. Sir, do you think that most offenders have suffered enough, J6 offenders? January 6th offenders, it was not any more than a protest. Sure, people messed up, but they have suffered. No, I don't agree with that. I think the people who went there intending to hurt policemen have to be punished. They haven't been punished enough. They deserve years in prison. And the people who went in, like one of my clients, who just went in, waved in by the police, no, they don't deserve to be punished. They've been punished more than enough. Wasn't able to graduate from law school. So I think it depends. And I think what President Trump's going to do on January 20th is groups. He's going to group together the people who didn't cause any harm and give them maybe pardons. He's going to probably give commutations to some of them, and some will probably leave in prison. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. Okay, let's see what we have here. Okay, Dershowitz. For more than half a century, I've been horrified that lawyers would take and represent almost anybody. Now, after watching your show, I've come to understand what it means and how important it is. Hey, I'm a teacher, so I'm glad, and I'm glad you understand that, and I hope others will understand it as well. As he continues, I've evolved from ignorance, and that's my job as a teacher. I hope I can continue to do that job. I got a bunch of emails, about whether or not a president can pardon people who were convicted of state crimes, and the answer is, of course, not. They can't. May be able to use a bully pulpit, but Trump was convicted of a state crime and he can't be pardoned. And Bannon is now under indictment in New York and he can't be pardoned. Some of the alternate electors were initially going to be prosecuted by Jack Smith, but then when he gave up, threw in the towel, some of these prosecutions are now being considered by states like Georgia and Arizona, perhaps others, and I don't believe there's a crime in any of these because alternate electors is the way you protest an election. That's the way it was done in Tilden Hayes. That's the way it was done in 1960 in Hawaii. That's the way lawyers thought about doing it in Bush versus Gore, and that's the way some Democratic members of Congress wanted to do it in 2016. That's the constitutionally appropriate way under Article 2 in the 12th Amendment. The only way you can really get an effective challenge is by having an alternate slate of electors. It's a contingent alternate slate of electors. It's not submitted as a definitive slate. It's submitted in the event the courts decide in favor of your slate of electors rather than the slate that was originally decided. So there are a lot of cases now pending, and what we're seeing too is a continuation of lawfare. Now, I think that every time the Jack Smith issues a report or makes a statement about his investigations, he's no longer working and as a prosecutor, and he should never have issued his report because prosecutors' job is to decide whether to indict or not to indict. By the way, that's just as true of prosecutors who've gone after Democrats as Republicans. It's one size fits all under the Constitution, and you have to apply one rule. You can't have one rule for the Democrats, one rule for the Republicans. So, there's a lot going on. Right now, the focus is obviously on the Middle East today, and then in days to come, it will be on the inauguration. And as I've said before, I'm not disclosing who I voted for, except to my wife. Even my children don't know. And but I am going to do everything I can to help our soon-to-be current president on January 20th. I want him to succeed. I want him to bring peace in Ukraine and the Middle East. I want him to help the economy. I want him to make America strong. I want him to have the cabinet appointees that I agree with or think are qualified confirmed. And I know today we heard from Pam Bondi. I think she's one of the most qualified people to have been nominated as Attorney General. She was previously an Attorney General. So I'm hoping that she gets confirmed very quickly and can start doing the right thing. She assured the senators today that she would not allow politics to enter into her prosecutorial decisions, and I believe her. I think that's the right thing to do, and I hope she will do it. All right. Goodbye from my car. Thanks to my driver, Chaim, who has been very quiet and very, he drove beautifully, so I was able to do this, and the phone didn't fall down. And thanks to my son, Elon, for doing this. Thanks to my wife for getting me some of the letters that I couldn't otherwise have gotten because I'm not home. But it just shows you if there's a will, there's a way. So I had the will, and that was the way. Thanks. See you next week. When we have a new president. When I talk to you next week, we will have a new president.